There was a distinctive sound on the battlefield that soldiers swore they could feel before they heard it, an electric ripping sound, like canvas being ripped apart by a storm. It echoed across Europe in 1942, shuddering through the hedgerows of Normandy, and shaking the nerves of Allied troops from Italy to the Eastern Front. It was MG42, a weapon built in the secret workshops of a defeated nation that became the hidden force behind countless tactical doctrines, battlefield strategies, and modern machine gun designs. To discover why this seemingly ancient weapon still refuses to die, and why its descendants are still in use, we must go back to the beginning, to a water-cooled giant from World War I. Long before the MG42 became the terrifying soundtrack of modern battlefields, its story began with a hulking, water-cooled ancestor that dominated a very different kind of war. In the mud, wire, and smoke of the First World War, the MG-08 sat like an iron throne of death, chained to its position by weight, hoses, and belts. It was not a weapon built for mobility or shock assaults. It was a fortress disguised as a machine gun. And for soldiers on both sides of the trenches, it was often the first sound that signaled the end of a day, a charge, or a life. The MG-08 did not simply fire bullets. It produced a sustained stream of lead through its water-cooled barrel, allowing crews to fire for minutes at a time without melting the metal. The heavy outer jacket, filled with water that boiled under constant fire, made the weapon ideal for static defense. Crews often described the steam hissing from the barrel after long bursts, turning the weapon into both a fearsome tool and a boiling cauldron sitting inches from their hands. Every belt fed into the MG 0-8 delivered a predictable result. Casualties rising across no man's land. This weapon was the product of an era that believed wars would be won by holding ground and grinding down attacks through sheer attrition. Its tripod was heavy, its cooling system cumbersome, and its overall weight exceeded what any single soldier could carry far. In many positions, the gun was transported by mule or mounted on wheeled carriages before being dug into fortified emplacements. The battlefield would shift, offensives would rise and fall, but the MG-08 remained tethered to its earthwork like an anchor of steel. Even so, for all its power, the MG-08 represented an outdated philosophy by the time Germany began planning for the next war. Trench warfare had stagnated the First World War into a nightmare of immobile front lines. Generals after the armistice studied every mistake, every mile gained at horrific cost, and concluded that the next conflict must not be fought the same way. If another war came, and many feared it would, it had to be fast, mobile, and decisive. During the interwar years, Germany operated under strict restrictions. They were forbidden from developing new weapons, forbidden from manufacturing modern equipment, and forbidden from building an army of scale. Yet the very nature of these restrictions pushed German engineers towards secrecy and innovation. Testing, modification, and research shifted to covert facilities or partnerships abroad. The old MG-08 remained a serviceable weapon, but it no longer represented the type of firepower required for the war German planners were imagining. That future war would demand movement, rapid assaults, and infantry that could keep up with armored columns. The lumbering, water-cooled heavy machine gun could not march with advancing troops or pivot quickly in close terrain. The MG-08 was excellent in a bunker. It was almost useless in a breakthrough. And that contradiction formed the earliest tension that drove Germany to seek something new. Its reliability under sustained fire was unmatched. Its role as the backbone of defensive killing zones remained undisputed, but its flaws were equally obvious. It required a crew of several men. The water jacket added unnecessary complexity, and its inability to change barrels quickly forced pauses during intense fighting. The evolving vision of rapid movement required a weapon that was lighter, easier to reposition, and capable of delivering the same volume of fire without the weight of a small boiler. This is where the origins of the MG family begin to shift. Even before German engineers designed the MG13 or the MG34, they deeply analyzed everything that had made the MG-08 work. They kept its mechanical philosophy, the idea of a machine gun that could fire longer, harder, and more reliably than rivals. They envisioned something far more flexible, a weapon that a single soldier could carry, that could mount on a bipod or tripod, and that could serve every battlefield role without redesign. The shift in doctrine was not theoretical. German military thinkers were already imagining how the next war might unfold. They envisioned armoured spearheads punching through defensive lines, motorised infantry racing behind them, and support weapons that could be repositioned in seconds, not dragged by teams and carts like relics of the Great War. The machine gun would become the centerpiece of small unit tactics, not merely a heavy weapon left behind in dugouts. This strategic shift forced engineers to reimagine every component of the gun. The cooling system could no longer rely on water. Instead, air-cooled barrels would need to withstand extreme heat. The mounting system had to become lighter. The weapon itself required a quick change barrel, something the MG42 lacked. And for ammunition, belts had to be more manageable and more compatible with portable rolls. The desire for mobility became the guiding principle for everything that followed. By the early 1930s, German designers introduced the MG13. It was a radical departure from the water-cooled monstrosity of the MG08. Built with air cooling, lighter construction, and the first iteration of fast barrel changes, it was not perfect. Its magazine feed system limited, sustained fire. But it proved the concept Germany desperately needed, a weapon that could serve both mobile troops and defensive positions. The MG08 still existed in the background, serving as a reminder of past mistakes and a foundation for what had to be improved. The 13 showed that a machine gun could be portable. But the next design, the MG34, would prove that a machine gun could be universal, capable of doing everything the 0-8 could do and more. For now, though, the MG08 serves as the opening chapter in a lineage of escalating innovation. It represents the beginning of an idea, the first block in a design philosophy that would eventually produce a weapon so mechanically efficient and so terrifyingly effective that it would remain in service for nearly a century. The First World War's static gun, the MG08, did not disappear overnight. German units continued to use it in secondary lines, fortifications, and defensive positions well into the Second World War. Yet, its true legacy was not on the battlefield, but in the minds of the engineers who studied its strengths and vowed to surpass its weaknesses. It gave birth to the belief that firepower should never pause, never hesitate, and never compromise mobility in the face of modern war. Germany was preparing for a new type of conflict, one that required a machine gun to keep pace with tanks, assault squads, and lightning-fast maneuvers. The heavy, water-cooled ancestor had played its part. And that transformation would soon emerge in the form of the world's first truly modern machine gun. By the early 1930s, Germany stood on the edge of a dramatic transformation in firepower. The heavy, water-cooled MG08 still lined bunkers, guard posts, and old fortifications. But the future of warfare no longer resembled the static trenches where that weapon had reigned supreme. Mobility was now the doctrine: fast columns, swift assaults, and infantry that could advance under a storm of covering fire. What the German army needed was not merely a new gun, but a new philosophy. And out of that need, the MG34 emerged like a revelation. The MG34 did not simply improve on its predecessors, it completely redefined the machine gun. Until its arrival, the world still categorized weapons into rigid types: light machine guns that infantry carried, medium tripod-mounted guns, and heavy water-cooled weapons dug into the earth. The MG34 shattered these boundaries. For the first time in history, one weapon could do everything: serve as a light gun on a bipod, anchor a defensive line from a heavy mount, act as a coaxial gun inside an armoured vehicle, and even fire at aircraft from special mounts. It was not just another tool. It was the world's first true general-purpose machine gun, and no other nation had anything close to its versatility. The moment German infantry received this new weapon, everything changed. The MG34 was was built with the precision of a luxury instrument. High-grade steel, expertly machined components, and tight tolerances gave it a smooth, almost silky operating cycle. Its rate of fire, around 900 rounds per minute, was unlike anything infantry forces had ever fielded. In an era when many armies were still using interwar relics firing half that speed, the 34 felt like a glimpse into the future. On the battlefield, this rate of fire produced a distinct mechanical rhythm that German soldiers quickly learned to recognize. It barked in controlled bursts, fast enough to overwhelm attackers, yet steady enough for accurate suppression. In the hands of a trained crew, it could switch roles in seconds, firing from a prone bipod position one moment and snapping into a heavy tripod mount the next. No longer did infantry have to rely on multiple machine gun variants. The 34 became the beating heart of every squad that carried it. Its quick-change barrel system was another leap forward. Unlike the MG0-8, where overheating required long pauses or constant water cooling, the 34 allowed crews to extract the hot barrel, insert a fresh one, and resume firing within seconds. This innovation turned sustained fire into a realistic tactic for mobile units. The gunner and assistant gunner worked as a seamless team, rotating barrels and keeping the weapon fed through belts that flowed from ammo boxes or drums. In these moments, the MG34 transformed infantry squads into miniature fire support units, capable of dominating ground far beyond their numbers. Yet this brilliance came with a cost. Literally, the MG34 was precise. But precision is expensive. Each weapon demanded countless hours of machining, skilled labor, and delicate inspection. The gun contained many finely fitted internal parts that allowed it to operate smoothly, but also made it sensitive to dust, mud, and cold. On clean ranges or in well-maintained barracks, it performed flawlessly. But on the frozen steppes of the Eastern Front, in the deserts of North Africa, or in rainy European forests, mud could seep into the receiver, sand could grind into the moving parts, and ice could freeze thin layers of lubricant. German crews quickly learned to care for the 34. Like an extension of themselves, they oiled it religiously, cleaned it obsessively, and shielded it against the elements in ways that borderline resembled ritual. The weapon could reward that devotion with unmatched performance, but it demanded constant attention in return. This sensitivity was not what truly concerned German high command. However, the real problem lay far away from the front lines, deep inside factories. Producing a single MG34 required roughly 150 man-hours and the finest industrial equipment Germany could muster. When war erupted across continents and the army expanded at lightning speed, demand for machine guns exploded. Infantry squads needed them, armored divisions needed them, aircraft needed them, and vehicles of every type were designed to mount at least one. Germany needed tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and the rate of production lagged behind the reality of war spreading across Europe. Every MG34 was a masterpiece. But masterpieces slow a war machine that requires mass production above all else. Engineers and officers began to understand the uncomfortable truth. The most advanced machine gun in the world might soon become a liability simply because it was too perfect, too expensive, and too slow to manufacture. But even these challenges could not stop the MG34 from reshaping German tactics. Infantry squads were reorganized around the machine gun, not the rifle. Rather than treating it as support, the 34 became the centerpiece of the squad's firepower, the tool that dictated movement, defense, and assault. While Allied forces generally used machine guns to reinforce rifle fire, the Germans did the opposite. Rifles reinforced the machine gun. This reversal made German squads remarkably powerful on the attack. With a highly trained crew operating the 34, infantry could pour devastating bursts of fire, suppress defenders, and advance in small bounding teams. In defense, the weapons, precision, and high rate of fire allowed German positions to carve deadly zones across open terrain. Entire platoons relied on the 34 to anchor their lines. Its adaptability extended to armored vehicles and aircraft. The 34 served as the coaxial and hull machine gun in tanks, offering the same high rate of fire that made it deadly in infantry hands. Mounted on special spiderweb anti-aircraft sights, it became a rapid-firing deterrent against low-flying planes, sweeping the sky with belts of glowing tracers. On the battlefield, this universal compatibility was unprecedented. Yet even as the MG34 performed brilliantly in combat, German leadership recognized that future warfare demanded something different. Armies needed a machine gun that could match the 34's destructive power, but without the delicate machining or high manufacturing cost. A weapon built not for peacetime perfection, but for wartime mass production. The pressures of an expanding conflict forced engineers to rethink nearly every detail. Stamped steel, not milled steel, became the target. Simplified parts, faster assembly, fewer machining hours. A design robust enough to survive mud, sand, and cold without demanding constant cleaning. As fighting intensified on every front, factories struggled to keep up. The number of machine guns needed on the Eastern Front alone surpassed projections. German divisions stretched thin across thousands of kilometers, and each squad required a reliable weapon that could endure without pampering. Belts had to flow constantly. Barrels had to be swapped under pressure. Mud and snow had to be brushed away without risking a jam. The 34 could not meet these demands sustainably, no matter how skilled its crews were. Germany needed a successor, but it had to be more than a replacement. It had to be faster, cheaper, more reliable, easier to maintain, and somehow even more deadly. Engineers began a challenge that would seem impossible. Create a machine gun superior to the world's best machine gun, but cut its production time nearly in half. They would need stamped steel frames, simplified internals, and a new mechanical rhythm that could deliver devastating fire without the delicacy of the 34. This ambition, born from the limitations of perfection, set the stage for one of the most feared weapons in modern history. The MG34 had broken every rule of machine gun design. What came next would break the battlefield. The MG42 was about to arrive. By the late 1930s, the German war machine was expanding faster than its factories could support. The MG34, brilliant as it was, had revealed an uncomfortable truth. A machine gun that cost too much, required too many hours to build, and demanded constant maintenance could never sustain a global conflict. German generals understood that if the next war stretched across continents, they would need an entirely different kind of weapon, something brutal, simple, reliable, and fast to produce. Something that could be carried by any squad, repaired by any soldier, and fired under any condition without hesitation. The answer came from an idea that sounded almost impossible on paper. Germany would build a machine gun not from expensive milled steel, but from stamped sheet metal, pressed into shape by large industrial dies and assembled with unprecedented efficiency. Instead of dozens of hand-fitted components, the weapon would rely on rugged parts, quick assembly, and fewer precision surfaces. The priority was no longer elegance, it was raw industrial power. The engineers assigned to this task understood the stakes. They were being asked to surpass the MG34 in every category: fire rate, durability, reliability, ease of use, and ease of manufacture. It was a challenge that would have crushed lesser teams. But German engineering culture thrived under wartime pressure. Every flaw of the 34 became an opportunity. Every complication became motivation. What emerged was more than a successor. It was a weapon that would redefine machine gun design for generations. The MG42. From the moment the first prototypes cycled rounds on test ranges, officers knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. The sound of the weapon was unlike anything heard before. A continuous metallic shriek, a ripping mechanical scream so fast that individual shots blurred together. It was as if the weapon did not fire bullets, but poured them in a liquid stream. Instead of the rhythmic pulses of older guns, the MG42 unleashed a roar that echoed across training grounds like a buzzsaw cutting through steel. This terrifying rate of fire, roughly 1,200 to 1,500 rounds per minute, was more than a sonic novelty. A single short burst from the MG42 delivered a wall of lead, thick enough to pin entire squads behind cover, shred advancing infantry, and neutralize exposed positions before defenders even had time to react. Its opening burst was so sudden and so dense that soldiers caught in its path often never heard the round that struck them. Accounts from Allied infantry later described the psychological effect of the weapon as overwhelming, a machine gun that sounded less like a firearm and more like a physical force tearing the air apart. The internal mechanics behind this devastating performance were equally revolutionary. The MG42 used a short recoil system with a roller-locked bolt, a design that allowed the weapon to cycle faster than any comparable machine gun of its era. When the round fired, the barrel and bolt traveled backward together for a short distance. At a precise moment, the roller bearings locked and then released, allowing the bolt to fly backward at extreme speed. This process repeated with incredible efficiency, enabling the weapon to maintain its signature rate of fire even under harsh battlefield conditions. Just as important was the MG42's quick-change barrel system, which was superior even to the already impressive system of the MG34. Instead of unlocking the barrel from the rear, the 42 allowed the gunner to open a side latch, swing the barrel out, replace it with a cool one, and lock it back into place within seconds. Even under heavy fire, crews could perform barrel changes with astonishing speed, maintaining dominance while preventing overheating. This capability transformed German machine gun teams into highly efficient engines of continuous suppression. But what made the MG42 truly revolutionary was its ruggedness. Stamped steel components resisted dirt, mud, and sand far better than the finely machined parts of the MG34. Soldiers on the Eastern Front, where mud swallowed equipment and winter froze lubricants into ice, found the MG42 shockingly tolerant of abuse. It could be dragged through snow, dropped into foxholes, and splattered with frozen earth, yet still roar back to life with only a quick clearing of the chamber. The mass production philosophy behind the weapon also changed Germany's strategic calculus. The MG42 required far fewer working hours to produce, meaning factories could turn out large quantities even under bombing campaigns and resource shortages. It was the perfect machine gun for a nation fighting several major powers at once. As the war intensified, the 42 became the backbone of German infantry units. It allowed divisions to maintain high firepower, even as manpower dwindled, because a single, well-positioned gun could halt advances and delay superior numbers. Its belts, too, reflected the logic of sustained fire. Soldiers frequently loaded tracer rounds in regular intervals, often every fifth round, to guide their fire and adjust aim under pressure. Drums designed to carry shorter belts kept the weapon ready to fire on the move, preventing the awkward entanglement of loose belts dragging through the dirt. Ammunition carriers followed the gunner closely, their metal cans clanking against their bodies as they ran ammunition forward to feed the weapon. In combat, the effect was immediate and devastating. Allied troops, encountering the MG42 for the first time in 1942, were often stunned by its ferocity. Units advancing through hedgerows, forests, or open fields suddenly found themselves pinned by an invisible storm of rounds. The weapon's distinct sound carried across kilometers, warning soldiers that they were entering a zone where caution meant survival. Even hardened veterans spoke of the MG42 with a mixture of fear and respect. It earned nicknames, some exaggerated, some accurate, but all of them admiring its terrifying effectiveness. Within German infantry tactics, the weapon only amplified the machine gun-centric doctrine introduced by the MG34. Squads were structured around the 42. The gunner, assistant gunner, and ammunition bearer formed the core of the unit. The rest of the squad existed to support the gun, protect the gun, and advance behind the gun. Every movement was coordinated around its bursts. When it spoke, the battlefield responded. With its astonishing fire rate, small teams could influence engagements far larger than themselves, creating the illusion of superior numbers and overwhelming power. Yet the MG42 had limitations, particularly in armored roles. Its side-loading barrel system made it difficult to mount inside tank hulls, where confined space prevented easy access to the barrel. For this reason, the MG34 remained the standard coaxial and hull machine gun in German tanks throughout the war. But the 42 dominated infantry roles, defensive emplacements, mounted positions, and airborne units. The MG42 was more than a machine gun. Its speed, power, and reliability represented the perfect blend of engineering genius and wartime necessity. Germany had done what seemed impossible: create a weapon better than the MG34 while cutting production time dramatically. But its story was only half complete. In the shadows of its performance, another innovation quietly emerged, one that would elevate the MG42 beyond even its fearsome reputation: a mechanical mount capable of turning it into a long-range, sweeping fire control system. A mount so advanced that its principles would be studied for decades. The Lafette mount was about to change everything. The MG42 was already a terror in the hands of infantry, a weapon whose speed and intensity could overwhelm units many times its size. But its true transformation, the shift from a fearsome machine gun into a battlefield system, came not from the gun itself, but from the piece of equipment built to control it. A mount so overlooked that even many historians fail to grasp its significance. A machine of springs, levers, optics, and geometry that quietly turned the MG42 into something far more dangerous than a rapid-firing weapon. This was the Lafette 42 tripod, the mechanical heart of German defensive firepower, and the most sophisticated machine gun mount of the Second World War. Unlike the simple field tripods of Allied armies, the Lafette was not a metal frame with legs. It was a full fire control platform, heavy, angular, rugged, and engineered with a precision that mirrored Germany's approach to warfare. At first glance, it appeared bulky and awkward, a 45-pound structure of tubular steel and mechanical parts. But once unfolded and anchored to the ground, it became a weapon multiplier, a force amplifier, a device that allowed a single machine gun team to command roads, fields, valleys, and approaches with a level of control bordering on science. Its most important contribution came from the two coiled buffer springs housed inside its frame. When the MG42 fired, recoil surged through the gun with incredible force. On a simple mount or bipod, this recoil shifted the barrel upward and sideways, forcing the gunner to constantly fight the weapon's climb. But on the Lafette, the springs absorbed the shock, stabilized the gun, and allowed bursts to land in tighter groupings. The result was accuracy beyond what soldiers expected from a weapon with such a violent rate of fire. The Lafette also featured finely geared elevation and traverse mechanisms, allowing the gunner to adjust aim with almost surgical precision. A smooth crank turned broad arcs into controlled sweeps. A small handwheel-guided elevation changes so subtle that a skilled operator could shift fire by inches, not meters. These controls gave the MG team the ability to lay down long-range suppressive fire or target small openings with frightening consistency. Yet even these innovations paled in comparison to the mount's most revolutionary feature, a mechanism that seemed almost ahead of its time. Known as the Tiefenfeuer automat, this clockwork device allowed the gunner to preset a firing zone by defining the near limit, far limit, and width of the beaten ground. Once the range limits were dialed in, the mechanism used the weapon's recoil to automatically sweep the machine gun across the designated field. Instead of relying on the gunner to adjust aim manually, the mount did the work itself. Every time the trigger was pulled, the gun would oscillate through the programmed zone, laying down fire with chilling consistency. This turned the MG42 into a semi-autonomous weapon capable of saturating an area without constant human input. A gunner could literally pull a string tied to the trigger while remaining under cover, leaving the mount to dictate the pattern of destruction. Entire approaches could be sealed off with a curtain of fire. Enemy infantry advancing into the kill zone would face not the aim of a single gunner, but a mechanical pattern of overlapping bursts designed to engulf the entire field. German machine gun teams mounted range-finding sights that allowed them to estimate distance with surprising accuracy. The Lafayette became equal parts machine gun and light artillery piece. German doctrine fully embraced this capability. Units trained to fire indirectly, lobbing rounds into unseen areas based on map coordinates and observer reports. The beaten zones created by indirect MG fire could deny access to roads, fields, or forest edges without the enemy ever locating the firing source. In the context of the war, this meant that even when German forces were outnumbered or outgunned, they could hold critical positions with small, well-trained teams. A single Lafette-mounted MG42 could dominate an entire hillside or valley, creating killing fields that stalled Allied advances and forced infantry to seek long, dangerous flanking routes. This was not merely theory. On the Eastern Front, where vast open fields turned into battlegrounds, German units used the Lafette to halt waves of infantry. In Italy, mountains and passes allowed MG teams to anchor defensive lines that punished attackers climbing narrow ridges. In France, hedgerow country became a hidden maze of prepared machine gun nests, each calibrated to fire into pre-measured lanes. Even when Allied forces fielded overwhelming numbers, they often found themselves pinned by a single tripod-mounted 42, sweeping a field with relentless mechanical rhythm. The impact was psychological as much as physical. Soldiers advancing under Lafette-controlled fire often described the experience as chaotic and disorienting. Unlike predictable bursts, the sweeping motion created an unpredictable pattern, forcing infantry to time their movements under fire that could shift direction in an instant. The screaming buzzsaw sound of the MG42, layered with the Lafette's smooth oscillation, created an auditory signature so distinct that veterans could identify it even years later. The Lafette also improved the weapon's survivability. When mounted low to the ground, the profile of the MG team shrank dramatically. Instead of standing behind a waist-level tripod, gunners lay prone behind a mount scarcely taller than the grass. The weapon could fire through small apertures, trenches, or camouflaged holes without revealing its position. This made counterfire difficult. Tanks struggled to spot the low machine gun silhouette, and infantry often mistook the firing origin for another position entirely. Additionally, barrel changes became even faster. The weapon sat at the perfect height for the assistant gunner to swing open the barrel door, eject the overheated tube, and insert a fresh one, while the gun remained pointed toward the target. Well-trained crews could perform this in 3 or 4 seconds, making the MG42 one of the fastest-to-service weapons anywhere on the battlefield. The Lafette's effectiveness helped mask Germany's dwindling manpower. By 1944, as German forces retreated across multiple fronts, small defensive elements equipped with Lafette-mounted MGs inflicted disproportionate losses, buying time and space for withdrawing units. Without this mount, many rearguard actions would have collapsed far more quickly. Intelligence reports collected after the war described the Lafette as a mechanical marvel and the most advanced infantry machine gun mount in existence. Soldiers who captured them often used them when possible, though the complexity sometimes made quick battlefield adoption challenging. Even so, many Allied veterans retained vivid memories of facing Lafette-equipped positions, describing the experience with deep respect and lingering unease. The fact that such a mount could turn a relatively compact machine gun into a wide-area suppressive system demonstrated the depth of German engineering thinking. The goal had never been to build a weapon in isolation. It had always been to build an integrated, mobile firepower system. And that system would outlive the war. Because when the Reich fell in 1945, the gun that sat atop the Lafette did not disappear. It found new homes, new calibers, and new armies. It transformed into the MG1, the MG3, and beyond. It still stands guard on armoured vehicles today, its lineage unmistakable, and its journey from wartime terror to modern mainstay was only beginning. When the war finally collapsed in 1945, Germany's cities lay in ruins, its factories shattered, its economy broken, and its army dissolved. But even amid the rubble, one weapon refused to disappear. The MG42, the stamped steel machine gun, born from total war, lived on, in bunkers, depots, caches, and abandoned strongholds scattered across shattered Europe. What German engineers had built for the Third Reich, the post-war world would not allow to die. In the first months after surrender, Allied forces collected enormous stockpiles of captured weaponry. Machine guns were stacked in courtyards, piled in hangars, and stored in warehouses by the ton. Yet in these mountains of confiscated arms, the MG42 drew immediate attention. Soldiers who had once feared it now examined it with something closer to admiration. Inspectors who had fought under its fire studied the stamped steel, roller-locked bolt, and blistering cycling speed with a mix of disbelief and professional awe. It was clear that while its creators had lost the war, they had not lost their engineering brilliance. Many nations, especially those rebuilding their militaries with limited budgets, saw the MG42 not as a relic, but as a treasure. Countries across Eastern Europe, the Balkans, created a perfect clone, known as the M53, a weapon nearly identical to the wartime design, retaining the 8mm Mauser cartridge and the original rate of fire. These guns would serve for decades, sometimes appearing in conflicts well into the late 20th century. In small wars and chaotic regions, the MG42's descendants continued screaming across battlefields long after the Reich had disappeared from maps. For the major Allied powers, however, the interest was deeper and more technical. American engineers attempted to reverse engineer the design in the late war period, producing experimental prototypes labeled 24, rechambered for the American 30-06 cartridge. Despite earnest effort, the United States struggled to replicate the precise interaction between bolt, rollers, and stamped components. Feeding issues emerged. Timing problems occurred. The weapon never reached its intended rate of fire. Eventually, American developers abandoned the project, concluding that mastering the design would require far more time than wartime pressures allowed. Even so, certain features of the MG42 quietly influenced later American weapons. When the United States developed the M60, its designers blended elements from the MG42's feed system with ergonomics and features inspired by the German FG-42 paratrooper rifle. The result was not a clone, nor a true successor, but a hybrid influenced by German engineering philosophy. In this sense, the MG42 shaped weapons far beyond its direct lineage. As the Cold War emerged and Europe divided into ideological halves, West Germany faced a new challenge. Rejoining the international community meant rebuilding a modern army within NATO, equipped with standardized weapons suitable for the alliance's ammunition, logistics, and doctrine. Yet when West German planners examined options from Britain, the United States, and other NATO partners, nothing available matched what they themselves had built during the war. The British Bren, though reliable, lacked the rate of fire and versatility German doctrine required. The American M60 was unproven and suffered from early reliability issues. Other NATO machine guns were either too heavy, too slow, or too inefficient to match the demands of West Germany's modernized infantry structure. The solution, though politically sensitive, was technically obvious. Thus was born the MG1. Germany's engineers began the process with characteristic precision. They retained the MG42's stamped receiver, roller-locked bolt, side-opening barrel system, and blistering firing speed. But they adapted the weapon to NATO requirements. Barrel profiles were changed. Feed systems were adjusted to accommodate disintegrating belts rather than the older non-disintegrating German type. Internal components were reinforced to handle the hotter-burning NATO ammunition. The result was a weapon that preserved the soul of its predecessor while adapting to the realities of modern NATO combat. Yet in its earliest form, the MG1 remained almost too fast. With its original bolt weight and spring tension, the weapon still fired well above 1,000 rounds per minute. In an era focused on conservation of ammunition, and increased barrel longevity, this speed proved excessive for sustained engagements. To address this, engineers developed a heavier bolt, slowing the cyclic rate to roughly 900 rounds per minute. This refinement, combined with improved metallurgy and more reliable feeding systems, introduced in the early 1960s, the MG3 became West Germany's primary general-purpose machine gun and quickly spread throughout NATO and beyond. Its versatility mirrored that of the MG34, but with the durability and ease of production perfected by the MG42. Mounted on bipods, tripods, armoured vehicles, and battle tanks. Others produced licensed versions. It stood guard on border posts, patrolled armoured columns, and rode atop vehicles in peacekeeping missions and counterinsurgencies. The MG3 also continued to embrace the same fire control philosophy that began with the Lafette. Modernized tripods allowed for improved optics, night vision compatibility, and more stable firing positions. The sweeping fire system evolved, but its core concept, mechanical control of beaten zones, remained intact. Even in the age of digital sights, the underlying geometry of the MG3's indirect fire remained rooted in principles conceived during the early 1940s. On armoured vehicles, the MG3 became nearly ubiquitous. Tank commanders relied on it for close defence against infantry and lightly armoured threats. Remote weapon stations incorporated it into modern targeting systems. Crews valued its high rate of fire, rugged reliability, and ability to deliver devastating bursts in moments when survival hinged on seconds. What made this continuity remarkable was that the MG3, despite its modern context, was still fundamentally the MG42. Its receiver geometry, feed system, bolt mechanics, and barrel interchange process followed the same principles. The stampings, cutouts, and functional lines of the wartime gun were still present, adapted only where necessary. There are few weapons in military history that have leapt so seamlessly across eras. The MG42 began in a world of steam locomotives, propeller aircraft, and black and white newsreels. The MG3 matured in a world of jet engines, nuclear doctrine, and color television. Modern variants now serve in a world of satellites, drones, and thermal imaging. Yet the heart of the weapon, the stamped steel body, the roller-locked action, the terrifying rate of fire, remains rooted in designs that predate many of today's militaries. The journey from MG42 to MG1 and MG3 reflects more than mechanical evolution. It reflects the enduring lesson that Germany understood earlier than most. A machine gun is not merely a tool, but the center of infantry combat. The weapon that dominates the squad dominates the battle. And the weapon that perfects mass production dominates the war. As the 20th century progressed, the MG3 cemented its status as one of the most successful general-purpose machine guns ever fielded. But its longevity leads to a deeper question: why, after so many technological revolutions, does this weapon still survive? Why does a design conceived in total war continue to serve in armies, equipped with night vision optics, remote turrets, and precision targeting systems? The answer lies not in nostalgia or tradition, but in pure engineering truth. The MG42's core design remains one of the most efficient expressions of battlefield firepower ever created. And as the world edged into the modern era, armies discovered that even with new materials, new doctrines, and new technology, nothing had truly surpassed the blueprint forged in 1942. The last step in this story leads to the present, where descendants of the MG42 continue to roar on armoured vehicles and firing ranges across the world, refusing to die even in the 21st century. In a world dominated by night vision optics, laser designators, remote weapon stations, and satellite warfare, few would expect a weapon designed in 1942 to remain relevant. Yet, the MG42, through its descendants, the MG1 and MG3, continues to hold its place alongside the most modern killing machines of the 21st century. It stands mounted on armoured vehicles, rests in fortified outposts, and appears in combat footage from deserts, mountains, and shattered urban battlefields. The question is no longer how this weapon survived the war, the Cold War, and the rise of digital-era warfare. The question is why nothing has truly surpassed it. To understand its persistence, one must begin with the brutal clarity of combat. Modern engagements demand reliability, firepower, mobility, and simplicity. Technology has advanced dramatically, but physics and battlefield reality have not changed. Soldiers still rely on suppressive fire to break ambushes. Vehicles still need close defense against infantry. Armies still require a weapon that can deliver dense, accurate bursts in moments where survival is measured in seconds. The MG42's architecture, perfected in an era of attritional warfare and industrial desperation, happens to fulfill these needs better than many modern designs. The first reason the design refuses to die is its roller-locked, short recoil system, a mechanical masterpiece that remains one of the fastest, strongest, and most efficient ways to cycle a belt-fed machine gun. Even with today's metallurgy and manufacturing, few general-purpose machine guns can match the MG42's ratio of weight to recoil to reliability. The rollers distribute force with remarkable efficiency, reducing stress on the receiver while allowing an exceptionally fast cycling rate. This mechanism, refined through the MG3's heavier bolt and NATO standard modifications, continues to outperform many contemporary systems. Second is the weapon's stamped steel construction, which embodies an engineering truth often overlooked by modern developers. The best battlefield weapons are those that combine simplicity with ruggedness. Stamped receivers resist clogging from dirt and dust, shed mud easily, and can be produced in large quantities without sacrificing battlefield reliability. Even in the 21st century, advanced CNC machining has not made milled guns inherently superior. In many environments, stamp designs remain more tolerant to real-world abuse. Then there is the matter of rate of fire. Most modern general-purpose machine guns fire between 600 and 800 rounds per minute, balanced for accuracy, ammunition, conservation, and barrel heat. But armies around the world continue to value the MG3 because its higher cyclic rate, close to 900 rounds per minute, with heavier bolts, delivers a brutal, immediate effect. A short burst creates an overwhelming wall of fire that can suppress entrenched enemies faster than slower-firing guns. When mounted on vehicles, where ammunition is abundant and recoil management is easier, the high rate of fire becomes a tactical advantage, not a liability. This characteristic makes the MG3 a natural partner for armored vehicles, modern tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and armored personnel carriers mounted as their coaxial or top-mounted machine gun. Its ability to lay down dense bursts is critical when breaking ambushes, clearing trenches, or repelling infantry approaching with anti-tank weapons. And while many nations have experimented with replacements, few alternatives deliver the same instantaneous suppressive effect. Even remote weapon stations, turrets controlled from inside a vehicle with electronic sensors, continue to use the MG3 because its mechanical consistency integrates well with digital fire control systems. Another reason for its longevity lies in doctrine itself. Germany's vision of machine gun-centric infantry tactics, born in the interwar period and perfected through the MG34 and MG42, influenced doctrines across NATO and beyond. Many modern armies still integrate machine guns as the core of small unit firepower. It remains easy to maintain, easy to train with, and devastating in the hands of a well-practiced crew. While digital optics have replaced mechanical range dials, the core principle of sweeping fire and controlled beaten zones remains the same. Some modern mounts include thermal cameras, ballistic computers, and integrated sensors. Yet the underlying geometry, the same calculations that powered the Tiefenfeuer automat, still applies. This continuity illustrates how the MG42's philosophy transcended its era. It was never just a gun. It was a system built around controlling space through fire. Furthermore, the MG3's compatibility with NATO standard ammunition and accessories ensures its place on the battlefield. As long as 7.62 by 51 NATO remains the alliance's primary full-power rifle cartridge. The MG3 will have an assured supply chain. Replacement parts, barrels, belts, and mounts are produced by multiple nations, ensuring that the design does not depend on a single manufacturer or outdated production line. In a crisis, reused stockpiles, refurbished guns, and rebarreled receivers can be returned to service with minimal effort. Yet despite all these advantages, the MG3 survival is not merely the result of practicality, it is the result of fundamental design excellence. When engineers attempt to improve a system, they often focus on ergonomics, weight reduction, or modern materials. But the MG42's blueprint represents a point of convergence, an equilibrium where speed, durability, reliability, and simplicity intersect. Attempts to radically improve upon it often introduce new problems: overheating, misfeeds, structural stress. The MG3's continued service is not a sign of stagnation. It is a sign that the original design was extraordinarily difficult to surpass. Its presence on modern battlefields offers a striking visual contrast. In conflict zones, armored vehicles roll past with digital camouflage and advanced sensors. Drones circle overhead with high-resolution cameras. Soldiers use radios encrypted with algorithms unimaginable in the 1940s. Yet atop these machines, the MG3 weights its silhouette instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with 20th century warfare. The stamped body, the profile of the barrel jacket, the contour of the feed cover, they all speak to a lineage that stretches back to the industrial workshops of 1942. There is also a deeper cultural dimension. For militaries that inherited or adopted the MG3, it has become a symbol of reliability. Armies often trust what generations have used before them. Veteran instructors pass down techniques perfected decades earlier. How to ride the recoil, when to switch barrels under pressure, how to feed belts without jamming, how to use the weapon not as a tool, but as an extension of the squad's will. These traditions reinforce the weapon's place in modern doctrine. While new machine guns continue to emerge lighter, modular, and engineered for specialized roles, few offer a compelling enough advantage to displace the MG3 completely. Even in countries that are transitioning to newer systems, stockpiles of MG3s remain in reserve units, depots, and vehicle mounts. In many parts of the world, it still acts as the primary general-purpose machine gun on the front line. The MG42's survival into the modern era also reveals an ironic truth about warfare. The MG42 did not require reinvention because it was designed with principles that remain valid, no matter how the battlefield evolves. Suppressive fire, rapid engagement, mechanical reliability. These fundamentals transcend technological shifts. In the end, the reason the MG42 refuses to die is not because it is old, but because it is timeless. A weapon born from the industrial desperation of the Second World War inadvertently became one of the most enduring machines ever placed in the hands of soldiers. Its descendants still roar from armored turrets and fortified positions, echoing across landscapes utterly transformed since 1942. Every burst today carries with it the mechanical DNA of a weapon designed in secrecy, perfected in war, and preserved because the world never produced anything better. In a century defined by technological acceleration, the MG42's legacy stands as a rare constant. It is the machine gun that conquered its era, survived the rise and fall of nations, and continues to shape the battlefield long after its makers vanished into history. And as long as militaries seek a weapon capable of overwhelming firepower at a moment's notice, the MG42 through the MG3 will continue to live.